Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 1st of December 2023. First part thereof, 1st of December. Pinch and a punch for the first of the month, no returns. Get me back. Let's go to where we normally start. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. And you can find those caveats in the description to this video below. So we can see that another really heavy day in terms of personnel losses, but actually in terms of a number of categories across the board. So 1,280 is bad. 13 tanks is bad. 32 APVs, armored personnel vehicles, that includes infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles. 32 lost in one day. That is incredibly careless. 22 artillery systems, so getting back up to high numbers in all of these categories. Really significant day of activity yesterday, evidently. 2 MLRS multiple launch rocket systems and 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. 22 drones, 38 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's a heavy loss in that category. That will affect logistics. And 13 pieces of special equipment. So that might be comms equipment, excavator, demining, all sorts of different equipment can fall under that category, and that is a heavy loss in that one. Possibly, in fact, the largest I've seen in that category. I'm due to do another analysis of Dell's stats that he's got, and actually he's got some Avdiivka stats as well that he's compiled. So I'll try and find time to do that today. His stats are kind of open source. You can check them in the description to this video below. There is an Excel spreadsheet that you can check out. So that is to say that the Russians have had a bad day at the office yet again. These figures are representative of what must be a huge degradation of their forces, but then they have a lot to draw from in terms of people, in terms of equipment. My guess is that they are having issues in terms of personnel, but they are, however, still able to mobilize through kind of crypto mobilization, whether that be illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, or random people. You know, you've got prisoners, you've got all sorts of areas they're picking from inside Russia. With a country of about 140 million people, give or take, they will still be able to throw a continual stream of people into effectively meat grinders. And we talked about this previously, which is Ukraine really need ammunition in order to keep the attrition rates high, so the Russians don't get a chance to train their troops properly and have to throw them into the front lines pretty much straight away. How long that can go on, I don't know. I mean, this is a conflict where it's going to be determined by the amount of materiel and the amount of personnel each side can throw at the problem over time, which is itself largely dependent on the size of the economies each side either has themselves or has access to. So I think safely say that Russia are looking better in terms of personnel, being a large country, and at present better in terms of materiel. But how long can those stocks last with these figures being posted on a daily basis? I don't know. We shall see. Andrew Perpetua, the mapper that I refer to an awful lot, has figures from both days, from 2 days, and I showed you, I think, let's have a look, I think these figures yesterday, so he hadn't posted to the figures yesterday, and I referred, I think, to his spreadsheet directly. Well, he's on the second day, as in ones that came out later yesterday. We can see, in fact, this morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, my time, you can see that this is another day of losses where the Ukrainians have posted greater losses, or they have received greater losses than the Russians, just marginally, I think, but it's pretty much parity. That is worrying for the Ukrainians. There's been 3 days where that's happened, I think, over the last month. Usually the Russians lose a lot more than Ukrainians, but this is one of those worrying days where you've got parity, A Mi-8 helicopter being lost by the Ukrainians. That is significant. I've not seen evidence of that, so I don't know. It says unknown cause here. I've not seen any footage or claim about that, so I'll have to look into the Mi-8 being lost. Some comms equipment, a boat, some artillery, including a multiple launch rocket system, a Soviet era, so BM-21 Grad. You got a couple of tanks, couple unknown varieties there. They're obviously fairly destroyed. Then a YPR-765 infantry fighting vehicle. That's a Dutch variant of the M113, so fairly old, and then pick up some vans and whatnot, Humvee, BMP. So not incredibly high value, but there's a couple of bits further up this list that are worrying, particularly that Mi-8. When we look at the Russian losses, air defense system at Book M2, we've seen a Book M1, M2, M3 lost in basically 48 hours, as well as some other air defense equipment. There was a Tor 2. A Tor air defense system. We've got a TOS 1A, which I think I showed you the video of yesterday, or at least referenced it, because I don't show you those videos because I get restricted, unfortunately. Excavator and a boat. We've got a command and control vehicle, which I think will be a high value one, and we've got a Geotel electronic warfare system, which is high value. So, and then a communications tower containing surveillance and comms equipment. So, as far as the value of this stuff is concerned, it looks like the Russians have lost greater value stuff than the Ukrainians, although that Mi-8 might have something to say about that claim. We've got a boat as well, as I say, a TOS 1A, so a thermobaric piece of artillery, M12 Rapira. Then we've got T-80 tanks, T-72s, BMPs, and then civilian and trucks. So, yeah, I come away thinking that the Russians have come out worse, even though it looks like it's parity. It's also worth noting there's a decoy there, Su-25 decoy, so one of those is not really a piece of kit anyway. We'll look at that in a second, not just yet though. We're going to go first to look at this, and again I'll refer to Dell's stats that will show this as well. I think you'll be able to see the trends, but you can see that this graph indicates that November was the worst month for Russian personnel losses. That is pretty incredible, considering it's a month where the Ukrainians have not been attacking. So their counteroffensive is pretty much ground to an end. And yet we've seen the worst month for the Russians. And that's largely a result of the Russians going on an offensive themselves in Avdiivka, as well as losing a lot of troops, I believe, in the Dnipro River, where the Ukrainians are attacking. That is really attritional for the Russians by their own admission, or at least many of the sources on the front line there are saying that. And then Avdiivka has just been an absolute nightmare in terms of losses for the Russians, even though they are pressuring very heavily there, and they're looking like they probably will take Avdiivka at some point, although the Ukrainians are being pretty dogged there. But yeah, just a very bad month for losses for the Russians. I'd obviously love to report to you what the Ukrainians are losing as well, some kind of comparison. We just don't have the figures. The figures that the Russian armed forces do produce are so fanciful, they're so out there, that there's no point really talking about them. Whereas at least the Ukrainian figures have an air of respectability in most of the categories. I think like I've talked about, actually I've said this for a year now, the aircraft figures and the helicopter figures are the figures that are most likely incorrect. I think it was Oryx themselves that made this claim quite early on in the war, saying that some of these other figures, fair enough, they look pretty reliable to some degree, and that's what I spend a lot of time trying to show you. But the aircraft and helicopter figures, they are fanciful for the Ukrainians, and so I think that's, and Justin Bronk then said that again the other day. Anyway, going on to other bits and pieces in terms of hits and losses, we have the Russians themselves doing the job of taking out some of their own troops, doing the job of the Ukrainians here. 12 soldiers were killed in Rostov, so that's inside Russia, as a live round during a training exercise hit 12, or hit a group of soldiers and killed 12 of them. So yeah, that's not ideal for the Russians. And just this isn't news per se, but it's just I think it's worth remembering who Putin is. And if I was in charge of a country and I made decisions where I was pretty much unilaterally responsible, unequivocally responsible for the death or injury of 500,000 people, right? So we're talking about dead, severely wounded, POWs, missing, all of those. If I was responsible for that, I couldn't sleep at night. And that's a moral difference, I guess, between me and a narcissistic, megalomaniacal dictator. But Putin, got to remember the sort of person he is. Too many people in Europe, says this person, are either hoping Putin will just somehow go away or can be reasoned with. They don't understand the mindset of someone who would gladly sacrifice 500,000 of his own people to fulfill his fantasies of power and domination. He has sacrificed a huge number of people for ideas that are hugely problematic anyway, but for his own kind of, yeah, you can argue it's for Russia, and you can talk about fatherland, motherland, whatever. But this is Putin's thing. He decided to invade Ukraine, and he has sacrificed 500,000 people to do that, and he doesn't seem fazed by that. So negotiating with that kind of human being, somewhat different than, I don't know, negotiating with me, for example. Incredible. Anyway, yeah, so that Jitel, that R330 electronic warfare system, it was taken out by a HIMARS strike here. So again, you see that's a high value bit of equipment being taken out by a fairly high value missile. The Ukrainians are doing a fairly decent job of taking out stuff like air defense and electronic warfare. And indeed, that's what Tendar talks about here. The amount of Russian air defense equipment recently been destroyed is noteworthy. This book M2 has been eliminated today, and that's on Andrew's list there. And its position is almost 50 kilometers behind the lines and near the coast of the Black Sea. There has been, I think, this degradation, particularly around Kherson and behind the Dnipro River, that I think, well, first of all, it's necessary to do that before you do major incursions into Kherson. They absolutely have to do this. But it is at least good news in terms of that front line. As they degrade this area of this kind of equipment, it gives the Ukrainians a greater chance of being able to succeed in their multiple bridgeheads along that line. I mean, it's frustrating that they seem to be hemmed in by the Russians, but the Russians themselves are losing a lot of troops in order that they can do that, and they are losing a lot of equipment. So on the one hand, it's challenging for the Ukrainians, but on the other hand, they are doing the right things in order to progress in that axis. Earlier today, Russian channels released a video reportedly showing a Lancet drone attack striking a Ukrainian Su-25 at Kryvyi Rih airbase. And this is the footage that did the rounds, where you can see an explosion of a drone, but actually no large explosion of anything else after that. And that was footage released by the Russians. Now, there are many claims, including from Russian sources, that admit that this is very likely a decoy. Russian channels celebrate the destruction of the Ukrainian Su-25, but it looks like a decoy. What are some of the reasoning? If you look closely, you can notice that the engines are not directly flush with the wings, but attached under it. I added a picture of a real Su-25. Okay, so let's have a look. So you've got engines seem to be located underneath rather than flush with the wings there. So that would indicate that it is arguably not a real Su-25. There are other reasons that other people say. So evidenced by atypical connection of the wings and the engines, a lack of mechanization of the wings, and a crookedly made cockpit canopy. And indeed, I think there's been an analysis on Telegram here by another source being referred to there. Yeah, so it's looking like that was a decoy. Now, what I will say is that even though that's a decoy, it still shows that in Kryvyi Rih, an airbase can have a loitering munition hit the airbase, hit something on the airbase. That the loitering munition hasn't been taken out by air defenses, and this spotter drone is with impunity spotting that loitering munition do its job. And so, okay, they've taken out a decoy, and a decoy has done its job, and it has used up that loitering munition. But this shows that the Russians clearly still have that capability to get all the way back to Kryvyi Rih and to hit an airbase. So, on the one hand, yep, good, well done, decoy, excellent. On the other hand, how's this still happening? No, you haven't lost the Su-25, but you could have done. And clearly the Russians can hit that airbase still. Right, Russia on fire. A couple of videos of a huge fire breaking out in Russia last night. It happened at the market in Rostov-on-Don, where clothing stalls went up in flames. So you can see that that was a really big fire. Just to give you a sense of that. A little bit bigger there for you. So that's another fire. Is it directly anything to do with the war? Don't know. But they had a pretty big job to put that out. And actually, apparently it spread to a pyrotechnics warehouse. Part of the city is out of power for some reason. So it does have an effect. Who knows how it started? That kind of thing would be relatively easy for Ukraine to do with saboteurs. Like starting a fire is not difficult, right? And you can all you need to give is a lighter to someone and a few hundred. It could be a Russian. Here's $1,000. Go and set light to something. $1 million would go a long way to creating multiple $1 million worth of damage in Russia. It'd be like $1,000 to each person. $1,000 and a lighter. Go for it, mate. Go and burn some stuff. I'm not advocating arson, of course, but you can see how that would work pretty well for the Ukrainians in Russia. And indeed, there's another market on fire in just hours after the one in Rostov burnt down. Another one is burning in Moscow. 20 stalls are on fire. No injuries reported, but another Russia on fire incident. Right, moving on to something I reported yesterday, but I just want to put a bit more meat on the bones to the details here. So a train that passed through Severomorsk tunnel, I've seen that written in 8 million different ways, in Russia is on fire. In total, the train was hauling 41 fuel tanks, 3 jet fuel tanks, and 6 ferrous metal cars. Okay, sources say that the SBU did it. Well, actually, it appears, one, this is more significant than one might think, and two trains appear to have been hit pretty much at the same time, or similar time. So, Anton Gerashchenko says, Russian Telegram channels report on November the 30th, saboteurs blew up a freight train in Buryatia at the Itikit Okusikan crossing, which consisted of 50 train cars, including 41 tank cars with diesel and 3 tank cars with aviation fuel. I mean, huge area of fire, and that tunnel is going to be out of action, one would think, for quite some time. Further transportation of the cars is still impossible. The explosion seriously damaged the tunnel rails, and the leaked fuel flooded them. One of the train's tank cars burned out. The other 2 had holes. A criminal case under the Article Terrorist Act was initiated on this fact. Later, another train was blown up in the same area. 4 tanks were burned out. 2 more were damaged by fire. According to preliminary data, the fuel spilled over an area of 150 square meters. It's just, incredible that 2 trains were blown up in the same area, or the saboteurs were acting on 2 trains. As you can see from this translation, pretty much what Gerashchenko himself said. Really significant activity taking place over the quite some way over into Russia there, and affecting the transportation from China into Russia in a really serious manner. So that, I assume, would be causing whooping and hollering back at SBU headquarters in Ukraine. I'm sure they're perfectly happy with a day's work in that respect. Okay, last night, so moving on to strikes. Last night, Air Defense Forces destroyed 18 out of 25 Shaheeds. So that's, I guess, if you compare that to the beginning of the war, probably quite good interception rates. But in terms of where really Ukraine would like to be, they would like 100% interception, which they have had recently. But that is worrying that 7 out of 25 drones have got through. 1 out of 2 X-59 guided aircraft missiles, reports Air Force of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, was taken out. So 1 missile of 2 and 18 of 25 drones. Air Defense has worked in Mykolaiv, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. There are claims that and the Rebar mentioned this, as Sim White says, some Russian mill bloggers, one of them is Rebar, claim that overnight drone attack managed to hit the Shepetivka repair plant in Khmelnytsky. So I believe this is an equipment repair plant. That was a tractor plant that's been turned into a repair plant. I know the Russians are doing that. Anyway, they say Ukraine's army uses that plant. Yeah, so that is possibly a challenge for the Ukrainians there. I don't know the damage if they've hit military targets. If 7 of those drones were not shot down, then you can assume that they have hit whatever targets they were going for. So that is 7 instances of damage that we don't know about. Quite often they are not reported. There are rules about not filming stuff like that within Ukraine as part of their kind of to keep morale up and security reasons and so on and so forth. We quite often don't know of the Russian successes within Ukraine. You can get a bit of a skewed picture because you're thinking Ukraine have hit Russia and these places are burning and those drones have gone into Moscow or whatever. Quite often footage of that comes out, but footage of the Ukrainian hits don't get out. So you're under the impression that it's not happening, but it is. Okay, so every time you see these interception rates that aren't 100%, those are drones that are hitting something. And even when they are intercepted, they can still be doing damage, of course, fall to the ground and explode. So on and so forth. Right, there has been drone activity in the Black Sea. A Ukrainian unmanned sea drone, it appears, was destroyed by the Russians, or at least according to the Russian MAD. I've been waiting to see Sevastopol get hit because we found out that the booms across the port and the booms protecting the Kerch Bridge as well on the other side of Crimea were washed away by the storm, that record storm that's just taken place in the Black Sea. So you would think the Ukrainians would want to be taking advantage of that situation, but it depends how many of these sizable drones they have to hand. Are they sending them out as they manufacture them? Do they have them just waiting around ready for the right opportunity? Could they send a bunch of drones against Sevastopol now? We haven't heard anything particularly, but I remain hopeful. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. The Border Guard are claiming, so this is the Ukrainian Border Guard claiming that Russian sabotage groups' activity is rising in Kharkiv Oblast. So up in the northern areas of Ukraine, Russian sabotage groups are attempting to cross the border into Kharkiv, particularly here, increasingly more often compared to their usual target, Sumy Oblast, which is further to the west, the Border Guard spokesperson has said. That's something to watch out for. Russians relocated more than 100,000 people from Asia to the temporarily occupied regions of Ukraine, according to the Center of National Resistance. Most of them work in construction, but in the future, the invaders plan to mobilize them in exchange for obtaining citizenship. this is, I guess, something that has two benefits for the Russians. So not only are they effectively populating the annexed regions with Russians, people who will obviously be pro-Russian, a bit like they did anyway after 2014, which is bringing a million Russians to Crimea and other Russians to the Donbass, no doubt. Now they are doing that in order to get them working, constructing whatever they need worked on as part of, I assume, the war effort in the annexed regions, but then potentially leading to those people being conscripted into or mobilized into the army. So, yeah. Anton Gerashchenko says the Russian regional officials from Novgorod region were forced to pay 10% of their salaries to the families of Russian soldiers attacking Ukraine. They had to, scare quotes, donate the money to a foundation that spends most of its funds on its own maintenance. According to local bloggers, employees of the regimental government, as well as district and village administration, received a demand to give 10% of their salaries to the families of the frontline soldiers, and they were not addressed with a, quote, polite request, but were faced with the fact and threatened with dismissal. Then the employees were given application forms to, scare quotes, agree transfer these funds to the accounts of a Save Lives Foundation. Judging by the annual reports, the foundation spends most of its collective funds on itself. Thus, the cost of the maintenance and organisation of programs amounted to more than 74 million rubles, or $832,278. A little more than 24 million rubles, or $271,630, went to targeted assistance to the poor, disabled, and children, and $4,300 to support local institutions. About another $56,589 was spent on the purposes indicated in the blank line, or by a blank line. So most of that money was spent on the administration of that money. I mean, we hear about this with charities a lot, but that percentage is an absolute, well, it's a crime as far as I'm concerned. So, but they're demanding that the administration of the region pay 10% of their salaries to that. I mean, it just goes to show the financial dire straits I think Russia is in. There's probably a lot of financial chaos going on under the radar there, but also shows the desperate straits that families are in, with troops, that are being killed, but more often troops that are supposedly missing. Although they have been killed, they've been declared as missing. The bodies haven't been collected off the fields, because as soon as you collect those bodies and you register those people as being dead, then you have to pay their families compensation. So it's in Russia's economic interest to leave those bodies lying and rotting on the battlefield. Yeah. Anyway, it's all part and parcel of this, and when you have families that their the husband or the father or whatever has been sent away, so maybe he had a job and then has been mobilized, so you don't have that money coming in from the job, and then the money from being mobilized is often apparently not being paid, so the families become destitute. And then if this is a father or a husband or whatever who is missing, then they get no compensation, so they're getting nothing. There's no money coming in at all. So you can imagine there will be many families across Russia that are suffering with poverty as a result of that. Russia's Supreme Court. So this is actually just super serious. This really does show that Russia has entered into as good an example of a dictatorship as you'll get. So Russia's Supreme Court has declared the LGBT movement an extremist organization. It doesn't even make sense, right? But like, movement of sexually diverse people are now an extremist organization. The Supreme Court of Russia has banned the activities of the so-called LGBT movement on the territory of the Russian Federation. The case was marked secret. The session was held in closed mode. Now, any initiatives protecting LGBT people in Russia would be outlawed, and all organizations dealing with the subject will be threatened with closure. Russian women's rights are restricted, domestic violence is not punished, and those convicted of brutal murders are pardoned after participating in a war. At the same time, Lavrov, so it's a foreign minister, speaks at the organization OSCE. Yesterday, he spoke at the organization that is supposed to be responsible for peace and security in Europe. This is really significant. You might think this is just one small area of society, but actually this is indicative of where Russia is at the moment. And it's becoming more and more of an officious, a brutal regime where any kind of freedom being, there's no freedom of press, there's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of freedom of movement has been restricted. I reported on that some time ago, probably a year ago, moving between regions because they need to have a handle on where people are so they can mobilize them if they need to. And moving between regions, moving out of the country is problematic. All of these freedoms are being stripped away from Russians to the point where it is just a classic old school brutal dictatorship. And any pro-Russian voice, any pro-Kremlin voice in my thread that ever talks about Ukraine and not having liberty and liberating areas. I mean, it's funny that you don't hear them say it so much anymore, but the whole idea that Russia are liberating areas of Ukraine, those kind of claims just need to be shut down now. Don't mean censored. I mean, like, we don't need to take you seriously if you're saying stuff like that. You honestly take a look at yourself in the mirror. Like, take a look at what Russia is doing, and tell me that with a straight face, give me rational argumentation that Russia is representative of liberty. Can't do it because it's not. It is a dictatorship, and I'm sorry. The elections that are coming up will be sham. And there is no hint of democracy in that country anymore. Interestingly, Vladimir Solovyov's daughter has reacted to Russia's Supreme Court declaring that the LGBT movement is extremist and is banning it. And with this quote, even Orwell would be sick to his stomach by now. We recognize non-existent organizations as extremist, but receive Hamas at the Kremlin. Quite rightly, saying that. So she wrote on our Telegram channel, "It's dark, comrades. Let's keep shining." So I might have to look into Ekaterina Solovyova and what she's like and who she is. But she's certainly not in agreement with her propagandist father, that's for sure. Anyway, to just kind of continue along a vaguely connected theme here, residents of a town in Russia were asked, so this is just a vox pop, whether NATO presented a larger problem to them than the despicable state of hospitals, roads, and other infrastructure in their town. You can probably guess our answer. NATO is the worst, one of them says. I mean, it's just, that you have, well, no, they don't know, but we can see they've got a completely distorted opinion of what's going on in Russia when they perceive that NATO is a bigger threat to them or is worse for them in their lives, in their daily lives. They're saying that NATO is worse than the state of their roads and hospitals, which by all accounts are not great. And so, if you're perceiving these things to be a threat to you, if you're perceiving these international organizations that don't affect you one iota on a daily basis, you're claiming they are, then Russian disinformation has done its job, and you are beholden to the propaganda of your state TV stations. Right, another emergency landing for a flight in Russia taking place as the aviation industry continues to fall apart due to sanctions, according to Tim White. This time the Aeroflot flight from Moscow to Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk with over 400 passengers on board managed to land safely. It had a problem with the landing gear. You can see there, it's not quite straight on the runway. But yeah, so another example of the aviation industry, which is the industry that appears to be most overtly affected by sanctions. It really there's lots of data to suggest it is struggling. Right. President Zelensky's been interviewed by Associated Press. The AP interview is quite interesting. It's, I guess, worth watching, but it's subtitled. They ask in English, he answers in Ukrainian. So let's just look at the headlines of basically what he said. So he's anticipated a resumption of an intense Russian air campaign over the winter. I think that means in terms of missiles and drones. Obviously, we're aware of that, he said. And this is an interesting bit of a moral dilemma, I guess. Zelensky said protecting civilian areas, in addition to keeping up defenses on the long front line, makes the winter campaign especially challenging. I get that. It's like, well, if we really need to protect these military and strategic installations and, energy infrastructure, all this and that, and military bases, more than protecting civilian infrastructure, arguably, but then the civilians are going to be hang on, what about us? And you have that trade-off of if we don't protect the military stuff, then we can't protect the civilians with our military. But if we don't protect the civilians, we don't have anything left of a country to protect. All these arguments go around. But so I can understand that he sees that as a challenging scenario. Okay. On Ukraine's summer counteroffensive, Zelensky admitted it did not produce the results many had hoped for. He said this was due mainly to Ukraine not receiving hopeful weapons from allies that kept ground forces at a disadvantage. I would say broadly yes, although the minefields and the fortifications have a lot to say as well. However, had they got cluster munitions earlier, had they got ATACMS earlier, had they got F-16s earlier, you could imagine that it would have been very different. So he absolutely has a point there. The ATACMS came along after the counteroffensive pretty much finished, and they were straight away able to take out 2 air bases full of helicopters that were hammering the Ukrainians in the counteroffensive. So that's just one small example of where Zelensky's correct there. He says, quote, "Look, we are not backing down. I'm satisfied. We are fighting with the second best army in the world. I'm satisfied. We are losing people. I'm not satisfied. We didn't get all the weapons we wanted. I can't be satisfied, but I also can't complain too much." You can't bite the hand that feeds you. So it's like, we didn't get it on time, and dang, that's really annoying. But if I complain too much, I'm going to piss off the people who are supporting me with that stuff. So I can't have a go at, say, the Americans for giving me ATACMS too late, because at the end of the day, they've given me ATACMS. We wouldn't have got it otherwise. We wouldn't have got them otherwise. So, there is, you can understand that sentiment. He conceded Ukraine is not able to advance quickly enough and achieve major breakthroughs, but he said that's not a reason to surrender. The Israel-Hamas war threatens to divert attention from the conflict in Ukraine at a critical moment, so he admits that. He said that previously. Quote, "The war here is full-scale, complex, large, and global, the biggest war since World War II, so we understand what the challenges may be if the focus of our allies' attention will be scattered," he said. "You see, attention equals help." Absolutely. It's just a one-for-one, they can only help us if they are paying attention to us. If they're not paying attention to us, they are less likely to help us. Zelensky wants to ramp up Ukraine's domestic arms production, enabling the country to produce its own weapons instead of depending on outside suppliers. This is really big. He wants Western allies to grant Ukraine licenses to manufacture and repair weapons, and wants cheap loans from the West to fund the plans. He said he told the US President Joe Biden that Putin is afraid of Ukraine becoming militarily independent. Quote, "If our production becomes powerful, very powerful, we will depend mostly on ourselves," he said. "Russia understands that all its plans for destabilization, expansion, and occupation of Ukraine will end." This is really important, and actually we are seeing this. We're seeing that allies are very keen that Ukraine becomes self-sufficient in terms of military production. Of course, that will be with the investment of the West, and they will be Western companies that are working together with Ukroboronprom, for example, to produce that stuff. So it will be to the benefit of the West, or obviously, be it politically, strategically, militarily, but in terms of the economics involved with that and Western defense manufacturers, being involved in Ukraine. But Ukraine needs to be able to build that and repair that stuff inside its own borders. Zelensky invited Chinese leader Xi Jinping to visit Ukraine, but such a trip has yet to materialize. Still, he said China's continued support of Ukraine is, quote, very important. He's obviously, being very careful with his rhetoric here to keep China on side, or at least not offside. China will keep a balance due to, quote, historical and economic relationships with Russia, he said, adding that, quote, lines that cannot be crossed include sovereignty, justice, and nuclear security. So, yeah, he wants to keep China not helping Russia overtly with military aid, and that means reminding them particularly about nuclear security. The one thing that China very often talk about in terms of holding Russia to account or keeping Russia in check is nuclear. So they say, we don't want that to happen. And I've said previously that might be because they've got interest in Ukrainian land. Something like 9% of Ukrainian agricultural land, somewhere between 9 and 15%, is either bought or long-term leased by China. And if that gets radiation poisoning, then that's an investment down a pan, but it's also their ability to feed their own population. So China do have a vested interest in Ukraine, arguably prevailing or at least not having its land destroyed by Russia. And then talking about elections, he says elections must take place as soon as Ukraine's security is stabilized. And that brings me on to the last bit, which is future national elections will be held after the war and the end of martial law. This is stated in a joint statement by representatives of the Verkhovna Rada, so that's a parliament, Ukrainian parliament. It's noted that the elections require preparation time at least 6 months after the end of martial law. I had a bit of not an argument. New War Economics made some claims that seemed a bit pro-Russian on Twitter today about elections and saying, "Oh, it's not sort of democratic." I was like, "Dude, you've got to understand the arguments. You've got to come on, you've got to understand the arguments for and against elections in Ukraine." Look, the UK. Great Britain didn't have elections from 1935 to 1945. 10 years of not having elections because of the Second World War. And the war wasn't even in our country. Here's a war that is the biggest war pretty much since World War II. And that's a war inside Ukraine's country, where they've got sort of a large mobilization of troops. You've got troops fighting on the front line. You've got huge diaspora communities of outside of Ukraine that have kind of taken refugee status. You've got people all over the place and people fighting, and you expect there to be elections where polling stations will become legitimate targets, where all that time, effort, and money spent on campaigning is time, effort, and money Zelensky's not spending going around the world drumming up support for the war. You can absolutely understand why there wouldn't be elections. I mean, in a perfect world, yeah, have elections if they could be guaranteed to be safe and they weren't wasting resources on elections that need to be put towards, fighting a war. So there are arguments for and against, of course there are, but on balance, I think the arguments are better for there not being an election, especially when 80% of the population in the latest survey, 80% of the Ukrainian population has stated they don't want an election till after the war. So actually, kind of democratically speaking, the will of the people is that there isn't elections. Or there aren't elections. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care. And sorry that was a long one. Speak to you soon in the second one, which will be shorter.